Welcome to the Curious Case. I'm Davis. Tell me, are you listening with a warm cup beside you? And what season feels cozy to your heart these days? Winter's calm sits gently over us tonight. The perfect moment for a quiet mystery. Share your thoughts in the comments. I always enjoy reading them. Now, settle in, breathe slow. And tonight, one cup hides the truth. The room settled, but not fully, not comfortably. There was a small shift in tone, a drop in warmth, the kind that only Miss Marple ever noticed. It began with a cold remark. Mrs. Carmichael made it quietly, almost polite, almost harmless, but sharp enough to change the air. Some people do enjoy attention. That was all she said, but her eyes moved toward Mrs. Archer. A simple look, yet it carried weight, too much weight for a casual comment. Mrs. Archer smiled, but it was a tight smile, a smile held together by effort, not ease, not comfort. She adjusted her scarf. She avoided Mrs. Carmichael's eyes. She looked at the table instead. Her fingers pressed the edge of her cup, a nervous little tap, almost silent. Miss Marple heard it anyway. Then came the pointed compliment. Mrs. Redwood delivered it with cheer, forced cheer. "Your parcel looks very important, Miss Dalton. Quite the centerpiece." Her tone was sweet, too sweet, the kind that hides a bite. Miss Dalton only lifted her chin. She enjoyed the attention. She always did. She let the moment linger, longer than needed, long enough for others to shift in their seats. A sudden hush followed, quick, unplanned, one of those quiets that slips into a room without warning. Teacups paused mid-air, voices cut off, eyes drifted around the table. Mrs. Langford folded her napkin, slowly, carefully, as if keeping her hands busy helped her keep her emotions steady. Miss Marple watched each movement, every detail. It was her habit, her comfort, her way of understanding people. She noticed hands shaking, not violently, just slightly, just enough to betray nerves. Mrs. Archer again. She held her saucer a bit too tight, her thumb pressed harder than needed. She swallowed once, not for thirst, but for composure. She also noticed someone avoiding eyes. Mrs. Redwood, cheerful on the outside, bright smile, warm tone, but her gaze never settled on Miss Dalton, not once. She kept glancing toward the kitchen instead, as if checking an escape route, or waiting for something, or someone. Then there was the staring, the long staring. Mrs. Carmichael stood near the table with the extra cups. She wasn't supposed to linger there. Her job was to manage the seating, yet she kept glancing at the cups, not the guests, not the decorations, just the cups, specifically the newer ones. Her eyes tracked them with quiet calculation. Miss Marple filed that away. She filed everything away. The room tried to return to normal. Little laughs, small jokes, adjustments to scarves and teapots. But the warmth didn't return fully. Not this time. Not after those remarks. Not after those glances. The coziness fought to stay alive. But something pressed underneath it. A quiet pressure. A strained note. Miss Marple leaned back slightly. Her hands rested on her lap. Her eyes softened. Her mind worked. Something had shifted in the room. Something subtle. Something human. Something uneasy. She didn't name it. Not yet. She only watched. She only listened. She only observed the cracks forming in small ways. Tiny ways. Ways most people miss. But she didn't. She couldn't. Because tonight, the truth had already started to move. Someone is hiding fear. The chatter settled again. Not fully. Just enough for movement to stand out. That is when Miss Dalton lifted a parcel onto the table. A sealed parcel. Wrapped too neatly. Edges perfect. Ribbon tight. Paper smooth. She placed it beside her cup. With care. With intention. With a little flourish that drew eyes toward it. "It's for later," she said. Calm voice. Light tone. But her hand stayed on the parcel. Just resting there. Just a touch longer than needed. Mrs. Redwood blinked. She tried to smile. The smile wobbled. Not much. Just enough for Miss Marple to notice. "Something special, I assume?" Mrs. Redwood asked. Miss Dalton nodded. "A surprise." She lifted the parcel again, turned it slightly. "Let the Ribbon catch the soft hall light. It holds a truth or two. Nothing harmful. Just overdue. Her words settled wrong. They settled sharply. Not loud, but pointed. A small line thrown into calm water. It created ripples. Real ones. Mrs. Carmichael frowned. Barely. But still a frown. She folded her arms. She leaned back as if distancing herself from the parcel. "It looks rather serious," she said. Miss Dalton only smiled. "That depends on who opens it." A few ladies exchanged looks. Quick looks. Half-formed questions behind them. Mrs. Langford rubbed her wrist. Mrs. Archer shifted in her chair. Even the vicar's wife, sitting at another table, paused her conversation to glance over. Miss Marple watched quietly. She didn't stare. She simply took in the details. The way Miss Dalton held the parcel. Close. Protective. Almost like someone guarding a letter with consequences. Her fingers curled around its edge. Not tightly, but firmly. As if the parcel carried weight beyond its size. Mrs. Redwood tried again. "What kind of truth?" she asked. She kept her tone soft. Too soft. The kind of softness that signals worry. Miss Dalton tapped the parcel lightly. "Just something that needs to be said." And tonight felt like the right time. Silence followed. Not long. Just long enough. Enough for a little unease to slip in between teacups and napkins. Someone laughed quietly in the corner. It didn't help. It only made the rest of the room quieter. Miss Marple watched the small tremor in Mrs. Archer's hands. She watched Mrs. Redwood adjust her apron twice. She watched Mrs. Carmichael tilt her head, calculating silently. The parcel had done something already. Shifted the tone. Changed the balance. Moved the evening in a new direction. Miss Dalton set the parcel down again. Closer to herself this time. She slid it a few inches. Toward her side of the table. As if keeping it from others. As if she feared someone might reach for it if she wasn't careful. "No peeking," she said. Teasing voice. But her eyes didn't match the tone. They stayed guarded. Firm. Alert. Miss Marple caught that detail. Eyes that didn't soften. Eyes that didn't match the smile. Eyes that held something heavy. Something private. Something unresolved. The parcel became the quiet center of the room. No. One mentioned it again. But everyone felt it. Everyone watched it secretly. Everyone wondered what lay inside. And why Miss Dalton brought it. And why she guarded it so closely. Tea continued. Conversation resumed. But the parcel remained between them all. Quiet. Still. Waiting. And Miss Marple kept her gaze steady. Because parcels brought into quiet rooms often held more than paper and ribbon. And Miss Marple senses danger inside it. Tea was poured again. Slow. Steady. Familiar. It should have calmed the room. It didn't. The mood still held that small tension from before. A quiet tension. The kind that slips between chairs without anyone naming it. Chairs shifted around the table. Not loudly. Just the usual small movements. A chair leg nudged the floor. Another seat pulled back a little. Nothing dramatic. But each movement carried a slight unease. Hands reached for sugar. A simple thing. Routine. Expected. Yet Miss Marple noticed the small delays. Someone hesitated before passing the bowl. Someone else waited too long before offering the spoon. Tiny moments. But tiny moments always speak. Mrs. Redwood leaned forward. Her hand shook slightly as she reached for a teapot. She steadied herself quickly. She glanced around as if hoping no one saw. Miss Marple saw. She always did. Mrs. Carmichael adjusted the extra napkins beside her. She straightened the stack twice. Then again. She liked order. She liked control. But tonight her movements were sharper, more deliberate, more careful, as if she was thinking of something else entirely. Mrs. Archer looked down at her lap, her breathing shallow. Her fingers tapped the edge of her chair. A quiet pattern, rapid, unsettled. She avoided looking at Miss Dalton. She avoided looking at the parcel, too. Her eyes kept drifting to the exit door. Miss Marple made note of that. A small distraction rippled across the table. Someone dropped a teaspoon. It hit the floor softly. Not enough to alarm anyone, but enough to stop the flow of conversation for a second. Everyone looked down. Everyone looked up. Everyone smiled politely. But the smiles were thin. The quiet shuffle at the table followed. A small shift in space, bodies moving slightly, teacups nudged closer, plates rearranged, hands brushing fabric, small things. But Miss Marple watched every one of them. Then someone's arm crossed Miss Dalton's place. Quick, natural, as if reaching for jam, as if helping with a plate, as if nothing unusual at all. But the movement was too smooth, too practiced, too confident. Miss Marple noticed the angle, the direction, the timing. She noticed Miss Dalton didn't look up. She was distracted by a question from Mrs. Langford. The perfect moment for a small switch. A tiny adjustment. A harmless gesture, if it truly was harmless. Miss Marple lowered her eyes to Miss Dalton's cup. Just for a second, she saw. Nothing obvious. Nothing bright. Nothing that would make another person look twice. But she sensed something. A shift. A change. A detail out of place. Not visible, but present. She leaned back. Calm. Quiet. Thoughtful. She didn't speak. She didn't react. She simply allowed the room to keep moving. Because the next moment would matter. The next moment would speak loudly, even if spoken softly. The air paused. Just slightly. Just enough for everyone to reach for their cups. And then the toast begins. Miss Dalton lifted her cup. Calm. Confident. Almost pleased with herself, as if the evening belonged to her alone. She glanced at the parcel. Then at the table. Then at the room. Everyone watched her stand. She liked attention. She always had. She raised her cup slightly higher. A small gesture. A simple toast. To clarity, she said. Short. Sharp. A line meant to sound clever. Some guests smiled politely. Some waited for more. Some held their breath. Then it happened. Fast. Quiet. Yet somehow loud in meaning. A gasp escaped her. Short. Sudden. Soft enough for only the closest to hear. But it changed the room instantly. Her fingers loosened. Her hand dropped. The cup slid from her grip. It hit the table edge. Rolled once. Then fell. The cup struck the floor. Tea spilled. A spreading pool. A slow stream. Nothing dramatic. Nothing messy. Just quiet liquid moving across the hall tiles. Then Miss Dalton collapsed. Sharp. Quick. Her body folded in on itself, as if the strength left her all at once. Her chair pushed back slightly. Her shoulder brushed the parcel. It tipped but did not fall. Screams rose around the table. High. Tense. Startled. Mrs. Redwood covered her mouth. Mrs. Archer froze. Mrs. Langford stood so fast her chair nearly toppled. Someone called for the doctor. Someone else shouted for help. Someone rushed toward Miss Dalton's side. Voices overlapped. Confusion spread. The room lost its order. The doctor came quickly. He kneeled beside her, checked her pulse, checked her breathing, checked her eyes. His face tightened, not out of drama, but recognition. Something was wrong, very wrong. He said nothing at first. He only touched her wrist again, then shook his head slowly. Spoiled heart, someone muttered. Shock, another suggested. Too much excitement, Mrs. Redwood whispered. All guesses, all quick, all spoken without thought. But Miss Marple stayed still, very still, calm as always. Her eyes moved, not quickly, not nervously, just carefully. She looked at the cup on the floor, the angle, the distance from the table, the color of the tea spreading across the tiles. She looked at Miss Dalton's lips, too pale, too quickly. She noticed the faint edge of something near the rim of the fallen cup, a residue, thin, almost invisible, but present. She looked at the table next, at the place where someone's arm had crossed moments before. She looked at the extra cups, still, arranged neatly, but one slightly out of line, just one. Voices rose again, crowded, panicked, everyone trying to make sense of the moment, everyone trying to explain what happened, everyone reaching for simple answers. Miss Marple did not reach for one. She kept watching the small clues that the others stepped around, watching details that most eyes skip in fear, watching the scene settle into something that wasn't an accident. She saw patterns forming, tiny links, small truths, quiet, signs hiding in plain sight. the kind that only speak to someone patient enough to listen. And Miss Marple listened. Miss Marple sees what others missed. The hall had not settled when the police arrived. Not even close. Voices floated everywhere. Questions. Whispers. Half-finished guesses. The kind that fill a room when no one wants to accept what just happened. Inspector Rowley entered first. Tall. Straight-backed. Footsteps firm. He carried authority the way some men carry a coat. Comfortably. Easily. Almost too easily. Constable Fenn followed behind him. Younger. Quieter. Hands clasped. Eyes taking everything in. He didn't push his presence forward. He let the room speak instead. That alone made Miss Marple pay attention to him. Inspector Rowley held up a hand. "Everyone stay where you are." A simple order. Clear. Firm. It settled the louder voices, but not the trembling ones. He walked toward Miss Dalton's chair, looked at the doctor, listened to a brief explanation, nodded once, then turned to the table. "All right," he said. "Who touched what? Who poured the tea? Who served the cups?" His voice carried a crisp impatience. He wanted quick answers. He expected them. He believed he would receive them without trouble. Mrs. Redwood stepped forward first, her voice shaky. I poured 2 of the pots. Not the last one." Inspector Rowley asked which pots. She wasn't sure anymore. Her hands twisted together, her eyes unfocused. Mrs. Carmichael gave her part next. She spoke in her usual tidy manner. "I arranged the cups earlier. All clean, all matching. Nothing unusual." Miss Marple noted the word matching. Interesting. Very interesting. Mrs. Archer tried to answer as well. Her voice, thin, hard to hear. She said she hadn't served anything. She said she hadn't touched the cups. She said she had only moved her chair. Inspector Rowley pressed her harder. Her answers grew smaller. Her eyes grew wetter. He turned to Mrs. Langford. She explained that she had passed the sugar bowl. Only that. Nothing else. Her hands trembled as she spoke. Inspector Rowley's tone softened for her. Just slightly. Only slightly. Then he looked at Miss Marple. She had not spoken yet. She had not moved from her quiet place near the corner. Her eyes rested calmly on the table. "And you?" he asked. "What did you see?" His tone felt polite, but only the surface was polite. The underneath held something else. Dismissal. Assumption. A belief that she had little to offer. Miss Marple answered softly. "I watched. That is all." Inspector Rowley gave a small smile. A patient smile, the kind used for elderly women. "Thank you," he said. It meant, "That will be enough." It also meant, "That will be all." Constable Fenn looked at her differently. He didn't interrupt. He didn't dismiss. He didn't assume. He simply watched her the way she watched others. Quietly, carefully, curiously, a mind behind his eyes. Miss Marple noticed that. Inspector Rowley returned to his checklist. He asked again, "Who stood closest to Miss Dalton before the toast?" Voices overlapped. Uncertain. Not matching. Not clear. Because the truth hid inside small moments. Small movements. Small switches. Miss Marple lowered her gaze once more to the cups. To the table. To the gap where Miss Dalton had fallen. Her mind connected what others had missed. Because someone had stood close. Close enough. Close at. The perfect second. She lifted her eyes again. Calm. Certain. Miss Marple already knows a detail he doesn't. The hall was calmer now. Not fully calm. Just quieter. The kind of quiet that arrives after shock settles into routine questions. Miss Marple moved toward the table. Slow steps. No fuss. No noise. She didn't want attention. She wanted clarity. The cups remained where they had been placed earlier. All except Miss Dalton's. Hers lay on the floor, broken slightly, tea around it, doctor's footprints near it. Nothing dramatic, just the leftovers of a moment. Miss Marple didn't start with the broken cup. She started with the table, with the neat row of remaining cups. She scanned them one by one. Calm eyes, steady mind. One cup caught her attention at once. Pristine. Not a scratch, not a mark. Not a faint crack along the rim. It stood out, immediately. Not because it was beautiful, but because it was wrong. She picked it up gently, turned it in her hand. Lightly, carefully, her fingers traced the glaze. Smooth, too smooth, newer than the others, significantly newer. The hall used older china, hard-used, washed hundreds of times. Some cups had tiny chips, some had faint discolorations, some had patterns softened by age. This one did not. Miss Marple set it down, then picked up another cup, older glaze, slightly worn. Pattern faded near the handle, then another cup, a tiny chip near the base. Another cup, a faint tea stain in the design. Every cup showed life, except the one. She returned to the pristine cup, turned it again, checked the pattern. Different, subtle difference, but unmistakable. The leaves curved differently. The flowers sat closer to the rim. The color held a cooler tone, not from the whole set, not part of the usual stack, not used in any previous event. It did not belong. Miss Marple leaned closer, looked for the maker's stamp. The mark on the bottom told the truth. A different manufacturer, a different year, a different source entirely. She placed the cup beside the others. A single odd one among familiar pieces. A single stranger in a line of known friends. Constable Fenn approached her quietly. He didn't speak at first. He waited. She appreciated that. Very few policemen understood the value of silence. "That one looks newer," he said softly. Miss Marple nodded once. "It is." She tapped it lightly. It was chosen, not taken by chance. The constable frowned. "You think someone brought it?" Miss Marple gave a gentle smile. "People rarely poison from cups they cannot control." He absorbed that. Slowly, carefully, he was thinking. Good. He would need to. Inspector Rowley called out another question across the hall. Loud, impatient. He wanted suspects listed. He wanted answers quickly. He wanted the problem solved by force rather than detail. Miss Marple ignored the noise. She kept her focus on the cup, the one that stood out, the one that did not fit the pattern of the room, the one that had been placed with intention. This cup wasn't an accident. It wasn't a spare. It wasn't a random mistake from the cupboard. It was swapped, deliberately, quietly, at the right moment, and, most importantly, it was placed in front of only one woman, and someone chose it for Miss Dalton alone. Dusk settled over Street Mary Mead. Quiet. Still, the kind of early evening when most people close their curtains and put the kettle on. Miss Marple had done the same. A simple pot of tea. A plain biscuit. Nothing more. She expected no visitors. But a knock came. Soft, uneven, almost uncertain. Miss Marple rose slowly and opened the door. Mrs. Langford stood there, nervous, hands clenched tightly around her gloves, shoulders drawn in, eyes darting past. Miss Marple as if checking who might be watching from the lane. May I come in?" she whispered. Miss Marple stepped aside gently. "Of course, dear. No questions. Not yet." Mrs. Langford needed to speak first. They sat in the small sitting room. Lamp on. Tea poured. Mrs. Langford held the cup but didn't drink. Her fingers trembled slightly along the rim. "I shouldn't be here," she said. A thin voice, barely steady. "But I didn't know who else to tell." Miss Marple folded her hands. A calm gesture. A comforting one. "Tell me whatever you wish." Mrs. Langford took a breath. A long one. One meant to steady herself. It helped only a little. "I saw something before the toast," she said. The words came slowly, measured, quiet. "I went outside for air, just for a moment, and I heard them." Miss Marple waited. No. Interruption. Patience always served better than pressure. "Miss Dalton and Mrs. Archer," Mrs. Langford continued. "They were near the side path, close to the hall wall. I didn't mean to listen, but they were not exactly whispering at first." Miss Marple nodded gently. "Go on." "Their voices were sharp, very sharp. Miss Dalton said something about the truth coming out, and Mrs. Archer said something like, 'Not tonight.' I'm not certain of every word, but I know the tone. It was not friendly." Her fingers twisted the gloves again, tighter this time. She set them down before they tore. "I stepped back," Mrs. Langford said. "I didn't want them to see me." But then Miss Dalton lowered her voice. "I couldn't hear everything. Only a little. Only enough to know it was worse." Miss Marple kept her expression mild. Her mind, however, gathered every piece. "What did you hear?" she asked softly. Mrs. Langford swallowed. Her throat tightened visibly. "It sounded like a threat," she whispered. "Not loud, not long, just a few words. Miss Dalton said, 'You won't stop me.' And Mrs. Archer answered, 'Don't. Force my hand.' The room stayed still. Only the ticking clock made sound. Mrs. Langford clutched her hands together again. "I don't know what they meant," she said, "but it frightened me. And then, after the toast, after what happened, I couldn't shake the feeling that it mattered." Miss Marple offered a soft nod. Her mind placed the argument alongside the cup, alongside the parcel, alongside the trembling hands she had seen earlier. All pieces, not connected yet, but ready to be. Mrs. Langford breathed out shakily. "There's one more thing," she said. She looked at the floor, then at the door, then at Miss Marple. Her voice dropped to a whisper, and Mrs. Langford saw something else too. Mrs. Langford held her breath for a moment, as if deciding whether she truly wished to continue. Miss Marple waited, quietly, not pressing, just present. "There's more," Mrs. Langford said finally. Her hands folded over each other, tight, uneven. "I didn't think it mattered at first, but now I think it does." Miss Marple leaned slightly forward. A small gesture, a gentle invitation to go on. Nothing more. "I saw someone near the parcel," Mrs. Langford said. Her voice lowered again, almost a hush, just before the toast, when everyone was busy with the chairs. They leaned over it. Not long, but long enough to notice the ribbon, long enough to touch it. Miss Marple did not react. Outwardly. Inside, however, she placed this detail beside the earlier ones. The parcel mattered, more than Miss Dalton's words had suggested, more than anyone wanted to admit. "Who?" Miss Marple asked softly. Mrs. Langford hesitated. "I don't want to accuse anyone wrongly," she said, "but I saw Mrs. Archer near it." Her hand brushed the corner. She looked around, twice, then stepped back, as if she had changed her mind. Miss Marple nodded slowly. "Go on." Mrs. Langford held her teacup again, still did not drink. "I went inside a few minutes later," she said, "and I saw the same person again, but this time near the cups, very close, just before we all sat down." Miss Marple felt the pieces shift in her mind. The pristine cup, the wrong pattern, the perfect glaze. Now someone near the cups at the right moment. "What did she do?" Miss Marple asked. "She adjusted one," Mrs. Langford whispered. "Just a small adjustment, barely anything. But she touched the handle. She moved it slightly. Not enough for others to notice. But I was standing near the window. I saw her hand. I saw her pause over it, as if thinking." Miss Marple's eyes softened, a sign she understood more than she revealed. Mrs. Langford looked at her lap. "I wasn't sure if I imagined it," she said. "But then I saw something else." Miss Marple waited again. Patience always paid. Mrs. Langford looked up. "There was a moment before the toast," she said, "when everyone drifted around the room, and Mrs. Archer walked toward the donation box. She didn't put anything in. She didn't take anything out. She only lifted the lid a little, looked inside, then closed it again." Miss Marple felt the final piece fall into place. Parcel, cups, donation box, all touched by the same hand, all before the toast, all in calm, unnoticed moments. 3 quiet acts, all connected, all deliberate, all happening before a single cup was raised. Mrs. Langford's breath trembled. "I don't know why she did it," she said, "but she did. I saw it clearly." Miss Marple gave a reassuring nod, a small one, a grateful one. "You've helped more than you know," she said. Mrs. Langford closed her eyes briefly. Relief mixed with fear. Miss Marple looked toward the window, her thoughts aligning, her logic settling into place, her instincts confirming what her eyes had already seen. 3 movements, 3 opportunities, 3 quiet chances, 3 actions, 1 motive. Late evening settled over the village. Most lights were dim, most doors closed. A quiet hour. Thoughtful hour. Miss Marple walked toward the village hall. No hurry, no sound, just a small, steady pace. She liked coming back alone, after people left, after noise faded. It helped her think. The hall stood still when she arrived. Dark windows, locked front door, but the side door was never bolted fully. Not on busy days, not after an event. Miss Marple knew this well. She opened it gently. No creak, just a soft push. She slipped inside, calm, alert, comfortable with the quiet around her. The hall looked different now. Same space, different feeling. Without people, rooms always reveal more. Silence shows details noise hides. Miss Marple paused near the entrance. She let her eyes adjust, then walked toward the center. Her steps light, measured, purposeful. She checked the decorations first. The holly on the wall, the tinsel looped across the window, the banner from the afternoon. Each piece in its place, untouched, except one strand of tinsel near the side table, slightly bent, out of line. She made note of it. Small things speak quietly. Next, she checked the chairs. Some pushed in neatly, some left crooked, some still carrying impressions of the people who had sat there earlier. She touched the back of Miss Dalton's chair. Cool, still, a memory rather than a presence. Then she checked the chairs near it. Mrs. Archer's seat, Mrs. Redwood's seat, Mrs. Carmichael's seat. Different distances, different angles. Chairs always told a story, especially when people leave in a hurry. She walked to the table next, the long one where the cups had been placed, the one that held the parcel, the one that had witnessed the toast, the fall, the collapse, the start of truth moving through the room. The tablecloth lay unevenly now. Not surprising. People had rushed around. Guests had stood quickly. Police had leaned across it. But one corner was folded over more neatly than the rest. Too neat. Too intentional. Miss Marple smoothed the cloth with her hand. Slow. Gentle. She lifted the edge slightly. Nothing underneath. Just the wooden table. She walked to the far side. Another fold. Less obvious. More deliberate. She touched it lightly. It lifted without effort. Something small lay beneath it. Miss Marple leaned closer. Not rushing. Not breathing differently. Just steady. She moved the cloth back another inch. Enough to see the corner of a paper. Not large. Not thick. Just a small slip, tucked carefully. Hidden. Placed by a hand that did not want it noticed during the chaos. She picked it up with 2 fingers. Turned it over. Still folded. Still. Unopened. Still holding its own quiet tension. She looked around the empty hall once, just to confirm she was alone. She was. Then she held the folded paper up to the dim light. A simple note. Nothing fancy. Nothing decorated. Just a message waiting to be read. A message someone wanted. Hidden. For a moment, but not forever. Miss Marple exhaled softly. Clarity often began with small paper squares. A folded note waits above the table. Miss Marple held the folded note between her fingers. Light paper. Plain paper. Nothing impressive, nothing decorative, but important, very important. She opened it carefully. No rush, just a steady hand. The crease lifted, the paper flattened. The message revealed itself in simple, sharp handwriting. 14 words, not more, not less. Meet me at the old mill after the auction. We settle this today. Miss Marple read it, twice, then once more, short, direct. Not emotional, not hesitant. Miss Dalton had written it with purpose. Clear purpose. The old mill was not a casual place. Not for meetings. Not for friendly conversations. Too far. Too quiet. Too private. People only chose it when they wanted to. Avoid being seen. A planned confrontation. Nothing else explained the tone. Nothing else explained the words. We settle this. Not a request. Not a question. A statement. A decision. Miss Marple folded the note again. Not tightly. Just enough to keep it neat. She held it between her palms for a moment, her eyes on the empty hall, her thoughts moving through the evening's events, one piece at a time. Miss Dalton had carried secrets. That much was clear. She hinted about them. She guarded her parcel. She raised her cup with a line about clarity. And now, this note confirmed it. There was something she intended to reveal, something she intended to confront someone about. Miss Marple considered the handwriting, the slant, the pressure, the speed. A person writes faster when they feel confident. A person writes with sharper lines when they feel firm. Miss Dalton had felt firm. Firm enough to plan a meeting with no fear. Firm enough to believe she held control. The question was simple. Whom did she expect at the old mill? Mrs. Archer? Mrs. Redwood? Mrs. Carmichael? All had reason to fear a confrontation. All had reason to dread truth. Slipping into the open, Miss Marple walked around the table again, slowly, thinking. Miss Dalton had not written the note casually. She had tucked it into the hall at a deliberate spot, a place where she could retrieve it later, or where someone else could, someone who knew to look for it. A planned meeting meant a planned risk. A confrontation meant danger. A truth meant consequences. Miss Marple set the note on the table for a moment, not far from where Miss Dalton had raised her cup. 2 actions, hours apart, but deeply connected. If Miss Dalton planned to meet someone after the auction, she must have feared that person, or expected them to fear her. Either way, secrets had grown heavy by the time the toast was made. Miss Marple traced the edge of the note with her finger. Not distracted, not emotional, just curious, quietly curious. Someone had wanted this meeting, stopped, not delayed, stopped completely. She folded the note once more, placed it into her small handbag. A simple action, a necessary one. Then she turned toward the door, the hall still silent behind her, still holding echoes of a truth that had tried to surface. And as she stepped outside, her conclusion settled in fully. Someone didn't want that meeting to happen. Miss Marple returned to the hall the next morning. Quiet hour, grey light through the windows. A few volunteers already inside, cleaning, sorting, tidying after the chaos of yesterday. She joined them in her gentle way. No fuss, no announcement, just simple help, picking up chairs, folding cloths, stacking plates, tasks she had done many times before. Mrs. Redwood thanked her softly, her voice still tired, still shaken, still unsure how to speak about the previous night. No one spoke. Much. Each found something to do with their hands. Miss Marple moved toward the long table, the place where the cups had been, the place where the parcel had rested, the place that held quiet answers. Beside it sat the donation box, wooden, plain, locked yesterday, but now open for counting. Miss Marple paused, not out of suspicion, just habit. She always checked the small things. Small things held truth. "Would you like to help me sort it?" Mrs. Redwood asked. Miss Marple nodded kindly. Of course she would. She sat down, pulled the box closer, looked inside. Coins, bills, folded slips, usual donations from a village event. But underneath the notes, something caught her eye. Not money, not a pledge card, just an envelope, white, neat, unmarked on the outside. Miss Marple lifted it slowly. Mrs. Redwood looked over, but said nothing. She assumed it was a misplaced card. A simple thing. Miss Marple opened it carefully. Inside lay a single sheet of paper, folded once. Clean edges, clear intention. She unfolded it. Read the contents. Her eyes narrowed only slightly. Not out of shock, just recognition. Numbers, dates, amounts, all too familiar, all too organized. A list of missing funds, small amounts taken over months, then larger ones, then round totals, then withdrawals no one had approved. Long-term fraud, quiet fraud, a kind done by someone who thought no one would look closely. At the bottom of the page was a short line, a message addressed to a single person. "Miss Dalton, you will explain this tonight." The words sat there without decoration, without hesitation, without any attempt to soften the accusation. Miss Marple read the line again, then looked at the handwriting. Firm strokes, deliberate pressure, but no name, no signature. Whoever wrote it wanted the truth revealed, but not their identity. She folded the paper again, placed it back in the envelope, then set the envelope beside the coins, as if it were nothing, as if it were just another item in the box. But her mind worked quickly, very quickly. Someone had known. Someone had gathered records. Someone had planned a confrontation, a different one from the old mill note. A financial truth, a serious one. Miss Dalton had enemies on more than one front, and someone in that hall had been ready to bring the truth to light, not privately, not gently, but publicly. Miss Marple tapped the box lightly, a thoughtful tap, because the evidence now pointed in two directions, two notes, two confrontations, two motives, all circling the same woman. She looked toward the door, toward the hall where secrets had moved quietly between teacups. Someone intended to expose Miss Dalton tonight. Miss Marple heard the news from the grocer first. He mentioned it casually, almost as gossip, almost as a mistake. "A stranger at the inn," he said. "Odd fellow. Velvet coat. Quiet voice." Miss Marple did not react strongly, but she listened, carefully, quietly. Later that morning, she walked toward the village inn. Slow steps, no rush, just steady curiosity guiding her. The innkeeper greeted her warmly. He always did. "Is your guest still here?" Miss Marple asked. The innkeeper nodded. "In the sitting room. Keeps to himself. Strange sort, but polite." Miss Marple thanked him and stepped inside. The sitting room held one man. He sat near the small fire. Velvet coat, dark green, very neat, very deliberate. A man who chose his clothing carefully. He looked up when Miss Marple entered. Sharp eyes, cold at first, then watchful. He nodded, almost respectful. "Mr. Barclay?" Miss Marple asked gently. The man raised an eyebrow. "You know my name. Only that you gave it at the desk," Miss Marple replied. Mr. Barclay smiled, faintly, not warm, not unfriendly, just guarded. "May I sit?" Miss Marple asked. He gestured to the chair across from him. "Of course." She sat, back straight, hands folded, calm confidence. "I understand you knew Miss Dalton," she said softly. Mr. Barclay exhaled, slow, controlled. "I did," he answered. "We had business once." She left it unfinished. Miss Marple waited. Silence often opened more doors than questions. Mr. Barclay reached into his coat, pulled out papers. Old, worn, folded many times. He set them on the table. "These were agreements," he said, "on property, on payments, on rights she believed she deserved. She argued constantly. She threatened to accuse me of fraud." Miss Marple tilted her head. "Was she wrong?" Mr. Barclay shook his head slowly. "No, she was not wrong. She simply exaggerated. Every detail." A short pause. "She wanted more than she was owed." Miss Marple touched the top paper. "Is that why you came?" Mr. Barclay nodded once. "To settle it, cleanly, without noise. She agreed to meet me after the auction. A private talk, a final line drawn. Another pause, but she never arrived." Miss Marple looked at him with mild curiosity. "Did you attend the gathering?" Mr. Barclay shook his head. "I stood outside only for a moment, saw the decorations, saw the lights. But I never entered. Not my place. Besides, the women inside would not welcome me." He smiled slightly. "Village gatherings rarely welcome velvet coats." Miss Marple accepted this with a small nod, her mind fitting his words into the larger pattern. He had motive, strong motive. Old disputes often hardened into anger, but he had no opportunity. He had no access to the tea. He had not touched the cups. He had not entered the hall. Mr. Barclay looked at her directly. "You think I harmed her?" Miss Marple smiled kindly. "I think you came for answers, not for poison." Mr. Barclay nodded again. A quiet agreement. He leaned back, tired, resigned. "Then I suppose I am only another loose thread in your thinking." Miss Marple rose slowly. "You are a thread," she said softly, "but not the one that knots the pattern." She walked toward the door, her logic clearer, her suspicion unchanged. "He adds pressure, but not poison." Miss Marple sat near her small writing desk. Morning light, soft, plain, enough for her thoughts to settle, enough for patterns to appear. 3 women, 3 motives, 3 quiet shadows touching the same moment. Mrs. Redwood, Mrs. Carmichael, Mrs. Archer, a triangle with sharp corners. Miss Marple began with Mrs. Redwood, kind hostess, quick with tea, quick with smiles, but not always quick with honesty. The donation box paper made that clear. Funds missing, amounts hidden, months of small, quiet movements. And Miss Dalton had the list, the amounts, the proof. That alone gave Mrs. Redwood a strong reason, a very strong one. Next came Mrs. Carmichael, strict, precise, always arranging, always correcting. She disliked disorder. She disliked Miss Dalton. Their arguments were not secrets. She hated losing control, hated any challenge to her authority, and Miss Dalton challenged her often, too often, enough to make resentment grow into something tighter. Then Mrs. Archer, quiet, nervous, carrying secrets she tried to hide. An earlier argument with Miss Dalton had already surfaced. Mrs. Langford had seen it, heard enough to know. It mattered. Mrs. Archer also lingered near the cups, near the parcel, near the donation box. 3 spots, 3 chances, 3 small, deliberate hesitations. Miss Marple folded her hands, her thoughts circling neatly. Each woman had motive. Each woman had access. Each woman could have placed the wrong cup. The pristine cup. The cup that did not belong. She reviewed the timeline. Piece by piece. Chairs moving. Sugar passed. A brief shuffle near the table. Arms crossing. Hands adjusting. People distracted for seconds. Seconds were enough. Mrs. Redwood had been busy with the food, running about, talking loudly, trying to appear helpful, but she left gaps, small absences, moments where she stepped behind the table, moments she could have used. Mrs. Carmichael stayed close to the center, ordering, directing, managing. She moved chairs herself. She rearranged place settings. She corrected everyone's spacing. Her hands touched nearly everything, even the cups, even the saucers. Mrs. Archer moved quietly, slipped through the edges of conversations, stood near the parcel, stood near the cups, stood near the donation box, not in a rush, not nervous on the surface, but with attention under her movements, a tension Miss Marple had noticed from the beginning. Miss Marple wrote their names on a small pad, 1 word under each. Redwood, money. Carmichael, control. Archer, fear. 3 motives, 3 different shapes, all weighty, all plausible, all connected to Miss Dalton, all pushing toward the same result. But Miss Marple trusted patterns more than emotion, and the pattern pointed to one conclusion. The poisoner needed not only motive, not only access, not only opportunity, but the right moment. The exact second when hands moved, when eyes turned, when the room shifted. Only one woman stood in that perfect place. Only one woman moved with that quiet purpose. Miss Marple closed her notebook gently, the picture now clearer, not complete, but close. But only one had the right moment. Miss Marple spread her small notebook across the table, not for decoration, not for show, just for clarity. She liked seeing movements in order. It helped her hear the truth under the noise. She drew a simple line, a straight one, divided into moments, not minutes, moments, because the switch had not taken long, not long at all. She began with the sugar. It had moved first. 3 hands reached for it, not at the same time, but close. Mrs. Redwood reached first, passed it across the table. Mrs. Carmichael corrected its position. Then someone else nudged it closer to Miss Dalton. Miss Marple wrote the names. Small letters, clear letters, then the cakes, small slices, shared quickly. People praising the recipe, people leaning forward, people turning their heads. A moment when no one watched the cups at all. She marked it on her line. A gap, a perfect gap. Next came the chairs. One squeaked, one shifted, one was pulled back too far. Mrs. Carmichael fussed about it, bending down, straightening it, blocking sight of the table for a breath. Just one. Then came the hand, the important one, a hand that crossed Miss Dalton's place, not in an obvious way, not in a suspicious way, just a casual reach. Someone leaned in to adjust a napkin. Someone murmured something polite. Someone tried to look helpful. Miss Marple recalled the angle, the position. The moment the room drifted into small chatter, A tiny blur of movement, nearly invisible, nearly forgettable. Except she had seen it. Calm eyes saw more than hurried ones. She returned to the timeline. She circled the instant when the hand crossed the table. One heartbeat, one small breath, one natural distraction in a busy room. That was the switch. Must have been. No other. Moment fit. No other space allowed such quiet access. Miss Marple considered each suspect again. Mrs. Redwood had been moving plates. Too far, too occupied. Her hands full, her steps quick. Unlikely. She made the switch then. Mrs. Carmichael had been managing the chairs, her back half turned, her attention split, her tone sharp. She moved too much to hide something delicate. Mrs. Archer had stood nearest, not busy, not loud, not rushed. She had leaned across the table twice, once for the sugar, once for the napkin, both times with no one watching her closely. Miss Marple tapped her pencil. A soft sound, steady, her conclusion tightening. The pristine cup had not dripped, had not smudged, had not touched anything else by mistake. It had been placed with purpose, placed cleanly, placed in that single instant when the room bent into confusion. Miss Marple closed her notebook, the pattern complete, the line clear, the truth forming its shape. The switch had not taken a minute, not even half. The swap took one heartbeat. Miss Marple prepared the small table in her sitting room. Quiet work, gentle work. A simple cloth, 3 cups, 3 saucers. Nothing fancy, nothing unusual, just enough to recreate the moment. She placed each cup slowly, 1 in front, 2 on the sides, the pattern identical to yesterday's arrangement. She moved the sugar bowl, shifted the napkin, adjusted the chair positions. Every detail mattered. Then she sent her invitations. Short notes, casual tone, no urgency, just a polite request for a friendly visit. Mrs. Redwood, Mrs. Carmichael, Mrs. Archer. All 3 agreed. None questioned her reason. Mrs. Redwood arrived first. Warm smile, tired eyes. She complimented the room, mentioned the weather, avoided the topic of Miss Dalton entirely. Mrs. Carmichael arrived next. Straight posture, firm steps. She adjusted a vase without asking, a sign she always needed control. Even here, Mrs. Archer came last. Quiet entrance, soft voice, hands folded tightly. A tension she could not hide. Miss Marple offered tea. Light conversation. Nothing sharp, nothing pointed. She spoke of the village, the choir meeting, the harvest display, topics that kept everyone relaxed. Then she moved to the table. She stood behind it with a mild smile. "I've been thinking about the layout yesterday," she said. "No reason, just curiosity." She gestured to the 3 chairs. "Would each of you sit where you sat before?" Mrs. Redwood chose her spot quickly. No hesitation, no worry. Mrs. Carmichael adjusted her chair twice before sitting. She needed the angle to feel correct. Mrs. Archer sat quietly, eyes down, hands clasped. Miss Marple lifted the first cup, set it down again. A small movement, casual, natural. She lifted the second, turned it slightly, then placed it near Mrs. Archer. Mrs. Archer's breath caught, only for a second, but Miss Marple noticed. Then she lifted the 3rd cup, held it longer, studied it as if unsure. A simple trick, nothing suspicious, just thoughtful. Mrs. Cameron leaned forward. Mrs. Redwood looked confused, but Mrs. Archer stiffened, not visibly to most eyes, but enough. Miss Marple asked gentle questions. "What shape were the cups yesterday? Did they match this? Do you recall any being chipped?" Mrs. Redwood shrugged. Mrs. Carmichael answered quickly. Mrs. Archer swallowed before speaking. Then Miss Marple moved 1 cup an inch. Just an inch, near the position where Miss Dalton sat. Mrs. Archer's eyes darted. A small motion. Flash, fast. At the cup, then away, then back again. Miss Marple did not react. She simply adjusted the napkin next. Another small test. Mrs. Archer's shoulders tightened again. Barely, but unmistakable. Miss Marple looked down at the table, her voice soft. "People remember moments differently," she said. "Sometimes only the hands know the truth." The 3 women said nothing. Not yet. Not until the pattern was revealed. Miss Marple watched their faces. She didn't need to speak further. The reaction had already spoken for her. Loud enough, clear enough. The truth slips in a single glance. Everyone gathered in the village hall again. Morning light, quiet room, small breaths held in uncertainty. No decorations moved, no chairs shifted, no one dared speak first. Miss Marple stood near the long table, calm, gentle, her hands folded softly. She waited until each woman settled. Mrs. Redwood, Mrs. Carmichael, Mrs. Archer. Even Inspector Rowley stood still. Constable Fenn watched quietly. Then Miss Marple began, her voice steady, her tone warm, not accusing, just explaining. "We start with the cup," she said. Her hand touched the table lightly. There was one cup that did not belong. Pristine, too new, wrong pattern. She looked around the room. That cup was placed here on purpose, not by chance. Mrs. Redwood blinked. Mrs. Carmichael stiffened. Mrs. Archer lowered her eyes. Miss Marple continued. "Then we have the hidden note," she said. "The one written by Miss Dalton." She held up the folded paper. "Meet me at the old mill. We settle this today." A quiet murmur moved through the room. "Miss," Marple let it fade. "Miss Dalton planned a confrontation," Miss Marple added. Someone knew. Someone feared what she intended to say. Inspector Rowley shifted. "And the donation box?" he asked. Miss Marple nodded. "Yes." Inside was a second message. Numbers, dates, amounts, missing, a record of long-term fraud, a letter addressed to Miss Dalton. She paused. Unsigned, but meant to expose someone. Mrs. Redwood swallowed. Mrs. Carmichael adjusted her sleeve. Mrs. Archer did not move at all. Miss Marple turned back to the table. "And then we have the switch," she said. The exact moment when the wrong cup was placed at Miss Dalton's seat. Her tone remained soft. The room was distracted. Sugar passed. Chairs pulled. Cakes shared. A hand reaching across the table. Inspector Rowley frowned. "Which hand?" Miss Marple did. Not answer yet. She continued her explanation. Only one person stood close enough. Only one person moved at the right second. Only one person touched the table when others were looking away. She stepped closer to Mrs. Archer. Not threatening, just near. "And only one person, Miss," Marple said gently, "had both fear and motive." She listed them quietly. Fear of exposure, fear of a private argument, fear of a secret being revealed, fear strong enough to act quickly. She nodded toward Mrs. Archer. "You had the perfect access." Mrs. Archer tensed. Her breath caught. Her hands twisted in her lap. Miss Marple kept her voice kind. "I do not believe you meant to cause chaos, but you felt cornered. You feared Miss Dalton. You feared what she would say, and the parcel she guarded worried you even more." Mrs. Archer's face tightened. A small tremor in her jaw, a flicker of panic in her eyes. No words. Not yet. Miss Marple lowered her voice. "Everything points to you, my dear. The cup, the timing, the notes, the fear, the hesitation, the quiet movements you thought no one saw." Inspector Rowley stepped forward. Constable Fenn waited. Mrs. Redwood gasped. Mrs. Carmichael whispered something under her breath. Miss Marple looked directly at Mrs. Archer. Softly, kindly, firmly. "You placed the cup," she said. "You made the switch." Then she added one final line. She doesn't deny it. The hall emptied slowly after the arrest. No voices. No rush. Only the low murmur of the officers escorting Mrs. Archer outside. Her steps unsteady. Her eyes lowered. A woman carrying fear more heavily than guilt. Inspector Rowley followed her. Constable Fenn carried the small evidence box. The door closed behind them with a soft thud, and then the room settled again. Quiet. Still. Almost unchanged. Except everything was different now. Miss Marple remained by the long table, hands resting lightly on the edge. Her breath even. Her thoughts steady. She watched the seasonal decorations glow faintly from the corner tree, a string of warm lights, a few paper ornaments, a leftover ribbon that had slipped loose. Small touches of cheer in a room that had seen distress. Mrs. Redwood wiped her face with a handkerchief. She whispered something about sorrow, something about Mistakes. Something about how the village would talk for years. Miss Marple gave her a gentle nod. Not judgmental. Not dismissive. Just understanding. Mrs. Carmichael gathered her papers with stiff fingers, her posture straighter than usual, control returning to her piece by piece. She said, "Good night," quickly, her voice thin, her steps brisk. She left without looking back. Then Miss Marple stood alone, truly alone. Only the quiet hall as her company now. She moved to the side table, poured herself a simple cup of tea. No sugar, no fuss, just warmth in a small cup. She carried Bings it to a chair by the window, sat down slowly, let the calm settle around her. Outside, the early evening deepened. Not dramatic, not heavy, just a natural shift from bright to dim. Miss Marple watched the street lamp flicker alive. A dependable old thing, always late by a minute. Always. Welcome. She sipped her tea, hands steady, eyes thoughtful. Her mind walked through the evening's truth again. Not to celebrate it, not to dwell, just to understand. Mrs. Archer had been frightened, terribly frightened, not only of exposure, but of history, of past mistakes, of Miss Dalton's sharp tongue. Fear did not excuse the act, but fear explained it, explained the trembling hands, explained the glances, explained the quiet steps near the cups. Miss Marple set her cup down. She thought of the note in her handbag, the old mill message, the planned confrontation, one more truth that would never reach its proper place. She thought of the donation box letter, unsigned, threatening in its own way, a truth waiting for daylight, a truth Miss Dalton never had the chance to defend or explain. Miss Marple folded her hands gently in her lap. Human hearts were complicated, sometimes heavy, sometimes careless, sometimes frightened enough to create harm they never imagined themselves capable of. She breathed in softly, calm, reflective, not shaken, just quietly aware of how many secrets pass through a village without being noticed until too late. Her gaze shifted back to the small glowing decorations, festive lights in a hall recovering from shock, brightness sitting calmly over a shadowed memory. She lifted her cup for one last sip. Soft steam rose, a quiet comfort after a long day, and as she set it down again, one thought settled, clearly in her mind. Some truths stay buried until someone stirs them. Davis returns with a warm breath of calm. He thanks you gently for staying through tonight's mystery. He reflects softly on secrets, choices, and how even quiet rooms hold heavy truths. Then he smiles and asks, "What moment caught your attention first? And where are you listening from tonight?" He invites your thoughts below, grateful for each one. And with a final cozy note, he promises more tomorrow. Tomorrow, another kettle will boil. A soft knock comes at Miss Marple's cottage. Letter waits on the step. No sender, no mark. Inside, a single line. She didn't act alone. Miss Marple reads it once, then looks up, calm, steady, already thinking, and the mystery begins again.